So welcome to our webinar series dedicated to informing families, prospective students, educators, and disability professionals out in the community about inclusive higher education and community services that are important to connect with in order to be prepared for inclusive higher education. In these slides, there's going to be tons of links that I'll reference as we go through, but we have a few more webinars coming through as the fall concludes, hopefully providing you a few more resources, all focused on pillars of inclusive higher education. We're going to definitely take time to answer questions as we go throughout this content. I know that anytime we talk about inclusive higher education, state agencies, whatever it might be, there's always nuanced questions, and we want to do our best to answer those. So know that we will take time, we'll pause to do that throughout our time. We're also going to have a feedback survey at the end of our webinar that we would just love for you to just have on your radar up front, that we'd love to hear your feedback. It really helps us better serve our community. And we are recording this webinar, so it's going to be sent to you tomorrow morning, along with our slides and our resources and all those things that you can have at your fingertips. So real quick, for people that are just kind of tuning in to inclusive higher education in general, I want to give a quick overview of who we are in the nonprofit that runs these webinars. So we exist to create inclusive college programs across the state of Colorado for students with intellectual disability. And our focus in developing those programs is that students with intellectual disability, or ID, would be fully included in college and be able to develop in those four pillars, or those four key areas: academic growth, social development, career advancement, and independent living. And our webinar today is really honing in on that career advancement piece. Some of the ways that we work to do this is providing education to K-12 educators and disability professionals in the fields, doing outreach to family members and students. We also work on expansion, reaching out to other higher education institutions to offer this as an avenue for students with intellectual disabilities in their community, and then tracking those outcomes, which I'll touch a bit about on up here on the front end. So this is our little team at IN. We have our executive director, Tracy, myself, Shayna Lang, and then Elise Kramer, our program coordinator. And we all want to be available to you. So if questions are sparked from our webinar today and you want to kind of connect with us directly, please feel free to take our contact information and reach out. We'd love to be a support in any way we can. And then Darby, I snagged this photo of you, which I love, and I gave you a whole slide. But Darby Remley, she is going to be presenting about DVR and giving really a deeper dive into what services DVR offers and how that's going to support the students that we serve. So I'll kick it over to her in a little bit, but just want you to have her contact information as well, which is also included at the end of her slides. So here's where we're going. I'm going to go briefly over what inclusive higher education is, just so you know what those options look like here in the state of Colorado. Then I'm going to touch base on what is the value of students who are interested in an inclusive higher education. What's the importance or the value of them being connected to DVR? We want you to kind of know that importance, whether it's before they're enrolled in inclusive higher education, while they're enrolled in inclusive higher education, or after. And then that is when I'll kick it over to Darby to really give you guys a deeper understanding of the services DVR offers and ways that you can access them. So real quick, what is inclusive higher education? So inclusive higher education programs offer alternative admission pathways to students with intellectual disabilities. I do put a little bit of an asterisk on that title or that diagnosis, because we realize that there are some students that may not have that clearly identified as a diagnosis, but would require the level of services that these programs provide. So I do want to note that sometimes there is gray area, but by and large, we're serving students with intellectual disabilities or those that do not have access to college without these kinds of pathways. These programs are fully inclusive and normative, so we're not recreating a special education class on a college campus. Students attend these programs and are taking college courses with neurotypical peers and going to clubs and parties like the rest of their peers would, and they have supports that go with them into those settings that are as authentic and organic as possible, and natural supports as best as possible so that they can have a normative experience. Students take courses that align with their career goal. So you're going to hear that kind of narrative as we talk about DVR. That career or that job goal is really the driver of so much. And that's the driver of these inclusive higher education programs too. So students get to select an area of study and then say, these are the classes that I think I want to take to build up a skill or build up multiple skills to be more employable in this field that I'm interested in. What's really unique about these programs is that they offer not only accommodations to those academics, but modifications. So students pursuing inclusive higher education have the unique option to have a program staff modify the assignments or the expectations of a college course to meet their cognitive level. They're still going to be challenged. They're still going to be required to participate intensely. And a lot of times they're coming from a K-12 experience where they were not challenged academically, but they're still going to be challenged academically at the college level. And so there's a shift for sure, even with modifications in place where we can see them rise to the occasion and grow academically. But because of those modifications, students do not earn the same credential that their peers are earning if they don't have modifications. So students in inclusive higher education programs complete a certificate. And these are certificates that are approved and accredited by the institution. They're transferable across our inclusive higher education programs. There's a transcript noting all the courses that they took, but it does identify that coursework was modified unless otherwise noted. And then they're going to receive more intensive support from staff and peer mentors in 4 domains, or those 4 pillars that I keep talking about, which are these: the academics, the social, the career, and the independence. So real briefly, those academic supports, as I mentioned, are those modifications, that certificate. They're also taking a lessened course load so that they can focus more energy on those courses and on that increased academic rigor. Social supports are primarily coming from peer mentors that help them connect with clubs across campus, participate in events that they're excited about across campus, things like that. And then we also have typically a program staff that's dedicated to career development or employment support for students enrolled in these programs, where they're going to work with students during their time of these programs to have job experiences, whether that be exploration and preparation like resume and interviews, or actually hands-on job experiences on campus or off campus, paid or unpaid. And there's kind of a progression that they go through to be able to develop those skills and be more ready for employment. And then also with independence, students have access to a direct instruction course where they talk about independent living skills, money management, all of those pieces. And also they can receive support in housing on campus. So for our programs that have on-campus housing, they can have a peer mentor come in and support them with cleanliness or roommate conflict, those kinds of pieces, so that they're growing in all of those arenas during their time in college. So real quickly, what are our students studying? What are some of the things that we're seeing students pursue as career goals and interests within these inclusive higher education programs? It's really all across the board. And we love this because it allows students choice. These are not programs where they're pigeonholed into, you're going to get this outcome, and so you have to take these classes. We really want our students to have choice just as much as any other college student would. So we've got students in graphic design, early childhood, nursing, healthcare services, human services, exercise science, hospitality, and the list goes on. And so they get to really choose from the course catalog and piecemeal together courses that are going to help them reach their area of interest and that employment goal. And some of the outcomes that we're seeing from students that are pursuing those types of courses and pursuing that kind of certificate coursework is also all across the board. So we have some students with that certificate. They went back to their hometown and are now working as a paraeducator. We have several students as teacher assistants in kindergarten or preschool classrooms, students working as a graphic designer in the city of Denver. We have a student working in healthcare as a dietitian. And kind of the list goes on, college ambassadors. There's all these unique outcomes that we're seeing where students really do have options of pursuing a career that they really love and pursuing a job that they really love because of the skills that they developed within these programs. And you'll see just that icon off to the right where it points out some of the increased employability of our students when they graduate. We have students, just about 75% of our graduates are in employment that they love and that they enjoy post-graduation. And so we're really showing a trajectory of more employability as well as all the additional things that come with college graduation, like social responsibility and feeling connected in their community and things like that as well. So this is just a quote that I love to incorporate and just kind of set before us as we talk about inclusive higher education, as we talk about employment options for individuals with disabilities. That just reminds us to set the bar high. And so this graduate parent says the bar has been set high and the students have risen and reached it. They've been presumed competent and their lives changed. That's really what inclusive higher education is presuming competence, believing that our students can accomplish great things and supporting them in that pathway to do so, and hoping that they are able to attain those jobs, those independent living outcomes that they desire. So real quick, what are those options that exist in the state of Colorado if you don't know them already? We have Elevate at ACC, which is Arapahoe Community College in Littleton. This is our commuter campus. So there's no on-campus living for students within this program, and it's a bit shorter. So that's a 3-year program typically for them to complete their certificate. Then we have the Office of Inclusive Services at UCCS in Colorado Springs. That's your traditional 4-year program for them to complete that certificate, and they have on-campus apartment style living. We have GOAL, which stands for Go On and Learn at UNC in Greeley, Colorado, and they have more traditional on-campus dorm style living for students where they can receive support. And then most recently, we added Global Inclusive Program from Regis University in Denver, Colorado. And they have on-campus apartments / dorms as well. And their program right now is limited to 1 to 2 years, but they plan to extend that a bit to 3 or 4 as they continue to develop their program. And all of these programs are working towards what I mentioned is that certificate. So that comprehensive higher education certificate where a student can receive those modifications, but gets to identify what area of study they want to pursue at that institution. And then they all also have what we call CTP status, which means that students enrolled in these programs can apply for federal financial aid. Because of that modified certificate, they only have access to federal loans, or sorry, what am I thinking of? Federal, at least help me out. What's my word?
They're eligible for federal student aid in terms of grants, work study, but they are not eligible for federal student loans.
Correct. Thank you. It's grants that I'm thinking of. Thank you. But that has really been very valuable for lots of our students that are enrolled in these programs, is completing that FAFSA application and seeing what they're able to access through those grants or scholarships. And then coming down the pike with that expansion that I mentioned at the beginning, we have CSU developing a program called the RAM Scholars Program. Theirs is really focused on agriculture trade in their area. So very much based on employment needs in their community and what students want to pursue in that particular field. They plan to have on-campus living, but will not probably for the first couple of years. But they're going to be able to open up their applications for this coming fall. And then MSU in Denver, Colorado. They're also developing a program. Do not plan to have on-campus living at this point, just because of the context of the city, but is a really wonderful program development right now, wanting to serve underrepresented students in our city. And then we're going to keep on expanding to the Western Slope or more rural communities, and then another community college in the coming year. So that's where we're headed with inclusive higher education. That's kind of the thrust behind these programs. This is going to just provide some links for you all to find out more from ways that we kind of continue informing people about these opportunities and about this expansion. But wanted to just give a pause before we get into the connection to DVR in particular. Does anybody have questions about inclusive higher education programming in general? Awesome. Okay, well, if anything pops up, feel free to throw that in the chat. But I wanted to speak towards or speak to the importance of why we really want families to be connected with DVR, whether or not they pursue inclusive higher education, and just kind of give you guys our context before Darby jumps into all the details. So really, when we work with students with a range of ages, so we can have students coming to inclusive higher education right after their senior year at 18, or after they complete transition services at 21, or if they jump out in the middle, that's fine too. But we've also served students that are much older, 35 or beyond that. And so there is not a cookie cutter timeframe that we're working with students, and we really want them to be connected with DVR before they even pursue inclusive higher education, because there's so much that they can do with DVR to begin preparing and exploring just their career interests, so that when they do apply to inclusive higher education, they have some clarity of that, what they want to pursue, what classes are going to be valuable, etc. So DVR offers that career exploration preparation piece that's really valuable for students before they even enroll in inclusive higher education. Also, when students are admitted to inclusive higher education, there's an option for them to access financial support from DVR. This is based on need. And so it's not a set amount that's given to each student and is not guaranteed for each student. It really is based on if this student or this participant has a clear career goal that's in line with the coursework they want to take at inclusive higher education, and that's deemed essential from them and their counselor, then they can talk about how much DVR can put towards their tuition. Again, that's going to be needs-based. There's no set number for that, but that's a very valuable resource for families to know, because sometimes that sticker shock of inclusive higher education can be a lot to take in. But DVR and a few other community agencies are willing to offer support financially because we believe in the outcomes that we're seeing from these programs. And then when we think about students that are currently enrolled in these programs, they still have breaks where they go home. We have summer breaks where they have months on end where they still need things to do, where they're not on their college campus and they don't have access to those supports and that employment coordinator from the staff. And so there's still some value to be reconnected with DVR in their communities during those long breaks to continue developing their skills and their experiences with employment. So that's one thing that I think a lot of our families don't consider, that our college programming doesn't extend through the summer typically. And so we really want students to have access to their community agencies like DVR that can continue that development and that experiential piece. And then when we think about our students after they graduate, we want them to know what agencies in the community are going to best support them, whether it's at that stage of life or maybe there's another stage of life where they come up against unemployment and they need support again. And we want them to know that DVR is an access point for them. But also a lot of our students are going to these inclusive higher education programs in specific regions or other cities, and then they move back to their home base and they don't have the same employment connections that they did from their inclusive higher education programs. So DVR has this regional job awareness in their area that they're living, and that's really important for them to connect to, so they don't feel like they're starting all over or starting from scratch. And then just at the base level, if students are still looking for employment post-graduation, DVR is going to be able to help them with that ongoing skill refinement and being able to help identify an appropriate job for them with the experiences that they've gained and the skills that they've gained from inclusive higher education. So there's lots of reasons why we think that DVR is so important to connect with. And we just want to share with educators and professionals and parents that it's not a one or the other kind of system. We really want our students to be well connected and to braid services well. So there's so much benefit to DVR. There's so much benefit to inclusive higher education. And when we braid those together, I think we see far more success for our students. So that's kind of our hope and our vision. But I'm going to go ahead and kick this over to Darby. So let me transition real quick and make you the co-host so that you can get started. All right, you should be able to jump in. And while Darby's pulling that up, have any questions popped up before we dive into DVR? Awesome. All right, Darby. You're still muted.
There we go. Okay. Well, thank you all for having me so much. I really appreciate it. Shane and I always like coming in and doing these and speaking to people more about inclusive higher ed, because it is one of the many services that we can support through DVR. If you see me looking back and forth, it's because I have my training brought up on the screen and then you all on this screen. So, as Sheena said, I am Darby Remley. I'm with the Division of Voc Rehab. I am the supported employment coordinator and trainer. And so my role is really to provide training for DVR counselors, DVR staff, external partners, community members, really anyone that wants any information about supported employment services. And so my role is to provide that training not only for serving individuals with an intellectual and developmental disability, which is the individuals we're kind of pretty much going to be focusing on when we talk about inclusive higher ed. But I also do lots of training around individuals that are diagnosed with a mental health diagnosis and work really closely with our community mental health centers. And so sometimes we see some dual diagnosis where maybe people may have a dual diagnosis of both IDD and mental health. And so that could be a thing that you could run into when supporting someone through an inclusive higher ed program. Let me get this going. All right. So a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So really just providing you information of, like a DVR 101. Who are we? What does our process look like? And what kind of services can we support? And then really diving a little bit more into what does supporting inclusive higher ed specifically look like for someone going through the DVR process. Our process is really broken down into different statuses within DVR. So referral and initial engagement. So that's the first status within the DVR process. So that's when someone is first applying, first coming to DVR. Then moving into that eligibility status, what does it look like in order to become eligible for DVR? What kind of requirements do we have? Then the next status goes into that comprehensive assessment and plan for employment. So what kind of things need to be done in order to develop a plan to support a service like inclusive higher ed? What other kinds of things may go on to a plan for other services that the individual may need? And then moving into that service status, once they officially enter into a plan with DVR, what does that look like? What does that service provision look like? And that's really where we're going to look at those inclusive higher ed services, because those are the services that do have to be included on the plan in order to support those programs. And then what does a successful case closure look like? How do we get to that? How do these individuals get to having their case successfully closed with DVR? And then what does that possibly look like for individuals who need extended supports even beyond that DVR case closure? All right. So this is just kind of a timeline of our services. So this just gives you a little overview of what those timeframes are to reach these different statuses. So from the time someone comes and calls in or makes a self-referral or goes on our website and fills out that referral page, we do have 30 days to get them in for that initial engagement meeting. And then from the time we have that initial engagement meeting and actually enter them into our system, we have 60 days to make them eligible. The reason we give ourselves those 60 days is sometimes we have to submit an ROI and obtain medical documentation from a medical provider. That is the way to become eligible for our services. There does have to be a medical documentation of a disability that presents a barrier to employment. And sometimes medical professionals aren't always the quickest about getting us that information. And so that is why we give ourselves those 60 days to gather that information. And then when someone is made eligible for our services, we then have 90 days to get them into a plan. That could be shorter, that could be longer. Any of these timeframes can go shorter or longer. If an individual comes in for their initial engagement meeting and they have their medical documentation, that's going to make that process much shorter. When they're in that comprehensive assessment stage and identifying a job goal and identifying the services they're going to need, if they have job experience, if they're really clear on what they want to do, those kind of things, again, that's going to make that 90 days to plan go much faster. So there's different things that we can do in there to make those processes go faster. But this is just standard. This is what we are required per the state. And then once someone enters into a plan and starts receiving services, what we are trying to get to is that job stability piece. So when we talk about inclusive higher ed, that's going to fall in between services and job stability. So we may follow and support someone through their inclusive higher ed program, but we're not going to get to even having those conversations about case closure until they have a job. So it would be after the completion of that program. So job stability is basically when they're doing really well on the job. This is where they want to work. They're maybe their provider is providing very minimal services for them to maintain stability on that job. Maybe they have a really awesome employer and they're providing lots of natural supports. But that stability is really when they're expected to stay at that job and that they're receiving pretty minimal supports there. And then once they maintain that stability for at least 90 days, we may set up a long-term provider in that case. But then ultimately that is where we hope to get to, and that is a successful DVR case closure. All right, so that first step is that referral and initial engagement. So I'm just going to give you some numbers here. There's some in here, and then there will be some at the end of our slideshow as well. But just to show you how many individuals we serve through DVR. So our fiscal year 2023 numbers did just come out. And during that fiscal year, we did serve 16,574 individuals through all of our DVR offices throughout the state. And so that does include our full VR cases as well as YP, which stands for youth programs. And so that is some of when we serve our youth, some of them don't go into full VR cases. So that means that they may be in a plan that has minimal services on it, more things like job prep and doing interviewing skills and stuff. Maybe these youth aren't ready for a job, but they want to start building those skills. And so between our full VR cases and our YP cases, we served over 16,000 people last year. And that encompasses a whole range of services. And but yeah, always trying to increase that number and serving as many people as we can. All right. So when we talk about our referrals and kind of how that process works. So on the bottom here, there is a link to our DVR interest form that'll take you right to the form that's located on our website. And that's a great way to get connected with a DVR office is through that referral form. So someone at our administrative level oversees all of those referral forms coming in, and then they disperse them to whoever their local office is. Because on that referral form, they'll put their address that they're located, and then they make sure that that referral form gets to the local office because that's who's going to be serving them. So when Shana was saying that they know the services and resources within their area, it's because we do have different DVR offices throughout the state. So the referral is the first process an individual takes on their pathway to DVR. And this is really the first time they will interact with DVR staff. So there are some offices that have rehab techs that may complete these initial engagement meetings. And then there's some offices who it will be completed by whoever their DVR counselor is going to be. So it just depends on which office they're going to, but really that initial engagement meeting is going to be pretty close to the same. They're going to be sitting with a DVR staff member and just gathering lots of information. They're going to gather just basic information, address, phone number, that kind of thing. But then they may start talking about those barriers to employment. I used to always tell the individuals that I was working with, and I was a DVR counselor, and we're told our whole life to not talk about the things that we can't do. Well, when you're in with a DVR counselor, you want to talk about those things because it's the DVR counselor's job to help identify the ways to help you overcome those things you can't do. And so, sometimes these meetings can be talking about really serious stuff, but that the DVR counselor is going to do a really good job of building that rapport and building that trust with that individual so that they feel comfortable talking about those types of things. Referral process can look different between different offices. Like I said, there is that DVR interest form. Some people can just call in and make that self-referral. There are some offices that have specific referral forms. Usually we see those when an individual is connected with a community center board or a community mental health center. They may have specific referral forms, but really the best way to get into to ensure you have that intake into that DVR office is to either do the interest form or even just calling into the local office. So you can go on our website, and there's a really great tool where you can just enter in the zip code of the person wanting to enroll with DVR, and it'll pop up what their local office is and what that phone number is. So either way, calling or doing this DVR interest form, it's all going to make sure that they get to that local office. As I stated before, we do have 30 days to get them in for that initial engagement meeting from the time that we receive that referral. And then here are just some numbers of applications that we receive. So as you can see, we get quite a few applications every month. So we have lots of people who get referred to DVR and who apply to DVR. Sometimes in those summer months, the numbers go down a little bit. People like having their summers off, and so that not as many people are pursuing work during the summer. But then those start ramping up in the fall and in the spring when people are wanting that money and needing to buy presents for our holidays coming up. So yeah, so our numbers definitely fluctuate of people that refer, but again, there's never a time that we don't have quite a few people coming through our doors and referring for our services. Okay. Any questions about any of that? All right, so we do have some goals when we're doing initial engagement. So the first being, like I said before, is just building that rapport with that person. This is when the DVR counselor is really going to start developing that relationship with them. As I said, they're going to be talking about some pretty serious stuff, and they may be talking about times where an individual wasn't successful with work and what are some of the reasons that led to that. And so that's why building that rapport is really, really important for that DVR counselor to have between them and the person that they're serving, because they want them to trust them. They want them to feel that they can be open and honest with that DVR counselor so that they can help them overcome those barriers. They're always going to create a welcoming environment. And then also they're always there to answer any questions that the person may have along the way. Okay. They're also there to gather information. Like I said, some of it can be very basic, just those demographic information, but then they may start talking about work history, disability information. They may talk about their different technology access they utilize. So do they use an augmentative communication device to be able to communicate? And really, what are their ability levels when it comes to things like filling out online job applications? Do they have access to a computer to be able to do that? So they may talk about just some of those forms of technology as well. And then, of course, one of the biggest purposes is to educate them about the DVR process. So they'll talk about those time frames, those 30, 60, 90 days. They're going to walk out of that meeting knowing what their next steps are. They will also talk about some of those closure reasons from application. So there have been instances where we have closed someone prior to them being eligible for DVR services. So things like they didn't have a disability that presented a barrier to employment, or we weren't able to gather any medical documentation, or the individual lost contact with us and we weren't able to move forward with eligibility because we stopped hearing from the person. So there have been reasons where we have closed cases at that application status, but ultimately that DVR counselor is going to really try and work and get with that individual so that they can move through the whole DVR process. And then, of course, defining informed choice, making sure that when we are providing them this information about the DVR process, that ultimately they then get to decide, okay, well, I know all of this now. Do I actually want to apply to DVR? All right. And so again, this is something that's going to happen very early on with the individual, and really provides that framework. But ultimately, the outcomes of this is that we want to ensure that by providing all these things, building that rapport, providing them all that information, giving them that informed choice, that we have the outcome of them entering into a plan more quickly and leading to employment success. We have lots of research around showing that rapid engagement leads to better success. So when someone is able to show progress towards employment and show it in a timely manner, they're more likely to have that success. When we have individuals who maybe lose contact or kind of fall between the cracks, and we don't get things done in a timely manner, a lot of times we're not seeing as much employment success with those types of situations. All right, so that is everything with initial engagement. So then we'll move into the next status, which is eligibility. Any questions before we do that? Okay. All right. So with eligibility, so in order to be eligible for DVR services, an individual has to have an impairment, an impediment, and an impact to employment. So impairment is a physical or mental impairment. Impediment meaning the individual's physical or mental impairment constitutes or results in a substantial impediment to employment. So it is because of their impairment that makes it so they have an impediment to obtaining competitive integrated employment. And then that impact of employment is basically that they require VR services in order to obtain competitive employment. So when we're doing these eligibilities, when we're gathering all of this medical documentation, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that language in there that basically leads to this disability presents this barrier, and that's why they can't obtain employment, and that's why they require our services at DVR. I can tell you that it's very rare that we don't find someone eligible for our services. If during that initial engagement meeting, they're being pretty open and honest with what those barriers are, and that DVR counselor is easily able to see through their medical documentation that they have these diagnosed disabilities, and referring to what was reported during their initial engagement meeting, it's pretty rare that we're not going to make someone eligible for our services. So this is just kind of another way of basically stating that same information that I said. But again, in order to be found eligible, that person does have to have documentation of disability showing either a physical, mental, or learning disability. So, it's in order for that DVR counselor to complete that paperwork that is required to enter them into our system as eligible, it does have to be medical documentation that is signed by a medical professional. And so whether that be a letter from the doctor, whether that be that diagnostic page from a service plan from a community center board. So there's different ways that we can obtain that medical documentation. We have had instances where individuals have come to us saying, I know I have this disability, but I haven't seen a doctor in years. I don't have any documentation showing it, but I know in the past I was diagnosed with this disability. That DVR office can help them to obtain that. That DVR office can send them for some assessments and send them to some of their medical professionals to help obtain that medical documentation. So just because an individual may not have that or have the doctor that we could reach out to gather that information, that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't come to us. We can help them to gather that information. And then also just that disability does present that barrier to getting, doing, keeping, or advancing in a job. And then they must need our services in order to work successfully. Because again, we do have individuals who do have diagnoses that would maybe typically be someone that you would think that diagnosis would present barriers to employment. But they can be completely independent. They can get jobs on their own. They can keep jobs on their own. So for DVR services, they do have to actually need our services. So, because there have been instances where, someone came and I was helping to provide services and they almost got offended because I had to have those conversations about their disability and the things they can't do. And it was very much that maybe they didn't need my services. They could do this independently. So. So when we are making someone eligible for our services, we are looking at those different functional limitation areas. So those areas are communication, interpersonal skills, mobility, motor skills, self-care, self-direction, work skills, and work tolerance. So again, having those disabilities that present a barrier into employment, those disabilities are probably going to fall in 1, 2, even more of these functional limitations. So a lot of times when someone has a disability, it doesn't just affect one functional area of their life. It usually affects multiples. Okay. So this just gives you a little bit of a picture of actually who we are serving. What are some of the diagnoses that you see come through DVR? Of course, the biggest number that we serve is our behavioral health diagnosis. And I think that is because we do have contracted services through our community mental health centers. So we have 13 different contracts around the state that they are contracted to serve people and get them connected with DVR. And so I think that's why our numbers are the highest there, because I feel like if we had contracted services with every school in the state or every community center board in the state, you would see those numbers much higher. But because these community mental health centers, we give the money to send us people. I think that's why you see those numbers higher than that. But those being our highest numbers, and of course, physical disabilities and with other, that's basically just kind of everything else, any other disability that we see. But we do serve a lot of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities because we get a lot of referrals from community center boards. Deaf, hard of hearing, and blind and low vision. We do have specific units within DVR that do serve that population. We have mobility specialists that go out into the community and help individuals that are blind and low vision to navigate the community. They train them on using their canes. They help them set up their house appropriately so they can navigate it safely. And then autism and acquired brain injury. Again, we see lots of individuals from there. When I was a DVR counselor, I worked with the veteran population. We saw a lot of brain injury come from referrals from our DVOPs and our veteran organizations. So, but yeah, really, like I said, anyone with a disability that presents a barrier to employment, we can serve them through DVR. Okay. Anything about eligibility? Okay. All right. So the next step is what's called comprehensive assessment, which is what we do to ultimately lead to that plan for employment. So everything that we do, every discussion that we have, every service that we put onto a plan, anything that's provided to that individual is all through person-centered planning. So this is really the best way to lead to informed choice for a person. And so the DVR counselor is always going to treat someone with dignity, compassion, and respect. They're always going to provide coordinated care supports and services and offer personalized care support and services. These DVR counselors are wanting to enable these participants to develop their strengths and abilities for successful employment life. They're coming to us because they're telling us that they haven't been successful. So that DVR counselor is going to do whatever they can and enable them in any way that they can to try and ultimately lead to employment success. The DVR person that we're serving is the one that directs their DVR case. I used to always say in all of the initial engagement meetings that I held, you imagine a car. You're the one that's driving. You get to tell us where you want to go and how you want to get there. I'm just in the back seat making sure we don't crash or get lost along the way. And then I once had someone say, or run out of gas, because I'm definitely going to make sure that we don't run out of gas along the way too. So it is the person that really gets to drive that car, drive that ship, or whatever it is, whatever form of navigation they're choosing for their DVR case. So we're going to provide lots of information along the way, provide them with lots of choices they get to make, but ultimately they're the one that gets to choose the direction that we take. All right. So during comprehensive assessment, they're going to provide and be given the opportunity to participate in lots of different activities. All of these activities are going to be done in a way to ultimately help them to identify a job goal and the services needed in order to obtain that job goal. So some of the things they may be doing is gathering more information to continue to build that rapport, discuss and explore career pathways, complete vocational assessments, interest inventories, personality assessments, and as needed is the big part in this bullet, because we definitely are never going to make someone do a bunch of assessments that they don't want to do. So that is one thing that really takes away from building rapport. I've seen instances where a counselor has told me they've just lost contact with me. They don't want to work with me. I can't keep their case open for much longer. And but when after talking to that person, we're saying, well, they wanted me to do all these assessments and I'm not good on the computer and I don't know how to do it. And so that was an instance where maybe this DVR counselor presented more barriers to employment. And that's the last thing that we want to do. We're going to build that rapport, really understand what access they have, what their interest areas are, and really only do some of those assessments if absolutely necessary. So, so we definitely don't want to bombard someone with additional assessments. We're going to identify accommodations and assistive technology needs. I talked a little bit about augmentative communication devices if they need that, but if there's any other forms of assistive technology that they may need, we can help to identify that and then possibly be the one to assist them with purchasing those types of devices. We're going to discuss barriers and identify necessary supports. And then we're going to begin those planned services. What services are going to be listed on your plan that's going to ultimately lead you to that employment success? Comprehensive assessment is a collaborative process where the person we serve consistently practices informed choice. So as we're going through these services, sometimes the DVR counselor has to have those hard conversations of, you know, you're telling me you need this service, but is it absolutely necessary in order to obtain that job goal? You know, I had an individual once come and be served through DVR that had just crippling arthritis and just really struggled with utilizing their hands. And one of their interests was jewelry making. And unfortunately, we had to have those tough conversations about, well, is this the most appropriate job goal for you? You know, yes, we could send you to some classes about doing it, but ultimately, you know, what I'm reading in your medical documentation is that your arthritis is going to continue to get worse and all these things. And so unfortunately, sometimes the DVR counselors do have to have those tough conversations and help with that informed choice as to whether that is in their best interest. Sorry, did something come through in the chat? I thought I saw maybe something pop. Oh, no, it didn't. Okay.
No, we're good still. I'll give you fair warning.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. So as we're doing comprehensive assessment, we're going to talk about what we have here at DVR called our Big 8. So our Big 8 are the individual strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, interests, and informed choice. So as we're working towards developing that plan, as we're working towards identifying that job goal, we're going to be having conversations in all of these big 8 areas, because we want to know all the things that they're already really good at, all the areas that they may have concerns about. We're going to talk about what their priorities are. What are the things that are most important to them when they think about pursuing employment and then not wanting to be affected? Where are they interested in pursuing employment for? What are some of the resources they already have that maybe we could build upon? And of course, ultimately, all of that is driven by their informed choice. A financial needs analysis is something that is required for every individual who is served through DVR. And this is just verifying that financial need. If an individual comes through our door and is being served or is receiving benefits through Social Security, they are exempt for a financial needs analysis. The DVR counselor still has to do the paperwork, and they just check that they're exempt from that process. So it is still required in that sense. But for individuals who don't receive Social Security benefits, we do have to look at their financial need for us to provide certain services. We do have a core set of services that is offered to no cost to anyone who applies for our services. Those are things just like job prep and development, and things like anything leading just directly to a job, benefits, counseling, those kinds of things. But when we look at higher cost services, so things like an inclusive higher ed program, we do have to look at if the financial need is there. So a financial needs analysis is completed during comprehensive assessment before they officially enter into a plan. So how we do this is basically we just gather information on how much income they have. So if it's just a single individual, the best way that we do that is by maybe collecting a month's worth of pay stubs if they are working. We may collect their tax information from the previous year. But we can also collect it through things like liquid assets or qualifying deductions. But really what we're looking for is this person not making a ton of money that they could pay for these programs on their own? We do need to see that there is a need, a financial need for us to pay for these services. If we are serving a youth that is still being counted under their family's income, we then have to look at that family income as a whole. And so it's a pretty in-depth process. And if an individual is working with a DVR counselor, they're going to explain that whole process to them and really go into a lot more detail about it. But as of right now, I just want to kind of give you that overview of that. If someone did come through DVR and wanting to go through an inclusive higher ed program, they're going to have to talk about finances with that individual. All right. So when someone comes in and applies and is made eligible and goes through comprehensive assessment, ultimately what we're trying to get to is that individualized plan for employment, or the IPE. This is a individually tailored document. It details the person's vocational goal and the services that are needed to reach that goal. So this plan is it could have a few services on it. It could have a ton of services on it. It's really just all based individually on that person and what they need. I've had people reach out to me and ask that real generic question of, what does DVR provide? What services can DVR provide? And our favorite saying at DVR is, it depends, because every plan is different. Every person that we serve is different. And so what's going to go on one person's plan is going to be very different than what's going to go on another person's plan. But our main goal for this past fiscal year was to increase the number of plans that we did. And so these are the numbers from last year. We did get 76.43% of plans completed before 90 days. And I think this past year we got up to 78%. So we did increase our numbers on that. But ultimately, again, that's another thing that leads to more success. When someone reaches all the way to plan, there is a better chance that they're going to have that employment success that they came to DVR for. All right. All right. So once they enter into a plan with DVR, they are officially in service status. So they're receiving services. So what we determine services for, all services that we provide and every service that goes onto a plan has been determined by that DVR counselor that is necessary, appropriate, and least possible cost. So when someone is talking about needing a service, the first, and these go in order of how important they are. So the first is that, is it going to be necessary in order for them to obtain their job goal? So when we think about someone going through an inclusive higher ed program, if they're wanting to achieve a certain employment goal, that by attending an inclusive higher ed program, they're going to have a better chance of getting to that, then that is necessary for them in order to get to that goal. And so that's where that DVR counselor is going to support them by attending an inclusive higher ed program. The appropriateness of it. So again, if someone is, so I think of one of those job goals or one of those job descriptions that Sheena had talked about, of someone that went into employment after they finished their program, that dietitian. So let's say they were coming to me and they were an individual with an intellectual and developmental disability, and they said, I want to become a dietitian, and they were researching dietitian programs. One was at the University of Denver that had no accommodations, no modifications to help them access the curriculum. But then they had another program through one of our inclusive higher ed programs that could accommodate to their needs, that could provide them the classes they could be successful with. And that one's going to be much more appropriate for that person. And that's the one that the DVR counselor is more likely to support. We want to make sure that the programs they're going through, the services they're receiving, are the most appropriate for them and what they need. And then the third one being that least possible cost. And this is really something we kind of take into account a little bit later on. If it's necessary and appropriate, that DVR counselor is usually going to support it. Least possible cost usually comes into account. Let's say someone is needing a stand-up desk for whatever they may have a physical disability and they need the opportunity to just stand up and sit down at multiple times during their day. And we start pricing desks, and the exact same desk from one retailer is $500 and from another retailer it's $1,500. We're most likely going to get the $500 one. So that's usually where least possible cost comes into account. We want to make sure it's providing all the same things the individual needs. But if it's offered cheaper through one retailer than another, that's usually where least possible cost comes into account. But necessary and appropriate are really the two driving forces behind the services that we approve. Okay. So we do have different avenues to employment. So the first avenue being someone's coming to us and just saying, I need a job. We are going to help them to pursue competitive integrated employment. So competitive integrated employment, or what we sometimes refer to as CIE, is jobs that have competitive wages, are in integrated settings, and have opportunities for advancement. And so these are jobs that anyone could apply for. They're not specifically held for individuals with disabilities. And so the whole point is that they are out integrating with other people with and without disabilities, being paid. It's that real work for real pay. And then they have the same opportunities for advancement as any other employee. Another avenue to employment is supported employment. So this is for our more significant individuals who need a higher level of service in order to obtain employment. And this is where just that traditional competitive integrated employment, they haven't been successful with. And these are also individuals who need those extended supports. So helping them to identify service providers. So Shana, you talked about PASAs. So PASAs are a program approved service agency, and PASAs are agencies that can bill to Medicaid. So DVR may be providing those services to that individual and paying for those services from that PASA at first. But then once they reach stability and we move towards successful DVR case closure, their Medicaid waiver, whoever's paying through Medicaid, can help pick up and still provide those services even after their DVR case has been closed. And another avenue for employment is self-employment. We do have a self-employment unit through DVR. So supporting things like gig workers and entrepreneurs and contractors. So Uber drivers and Grubhub and those kind of things. We have supported those types of jobs. Depending on the type of job, they may be required to write a business plan. It is a pretty in-depth process, the self-employment, but I mean that goes for any type of self-employment, so that's definitely not specific to DVR. But we have lots of great vendors that can work with our individuals to help them develop that business plan and really move forward to successfully having their own business. And then we also support the business enterprise program. So these are trainings and startups for individuals who are blind. So it's those vending programs that are offered in government buildings. That's another thing that DVR can support. So these are just our basic avenues for employment. So if someone is coming and saying, I just want a job, these are different ways that we can support them to help them get a job. All right. Another avenue to employment is first starting with education or training, as we call it. And what we're specifically talking about today with inclusive higher ed, we do have supporting inclusive higher ed programs in our fee schedule and can support the different programs that Shana had listed, our CTP programs. The new and upcoming programs are ones that we will also support. We can also support, CSU has a program called Opportunities for Post-Secondary Success. There's a program that we can support through that, as well as Front Range Community College in Fort Collins has another program that we can support through our inclusive higher ed fee. And so we do have lots of different opportunities that individuals can go through these different programs to get that inclusive higher ed or that post-secondary experience for them. So the way that DVR supports these is through financial support for tuition. So if an individual comes in, they complete the financial needs analysis, it is determined that they have that financial need, then DVR can support by paying that tuition for the inclusive higher ed program. There are some programs that have their tuition, they have the inclusive higher ed skills training fee, but then they also have a program fee on top of that. And unfortunately, that is one fee that DVR cannot support. So that would be the responsibility of the individual or the individual's family, whoever is assisting them with that. But how much we're paying for tuition and how much we're paying for that skills training fee, they're very large amounts. And so we're hoping that burden by covering those two large amounts is enough to support that family that they could take on that program fee on their own. And then that inclusive higher ed payment is made directly to the inclusive higher ed program. And this one is, we pay that $3,000 per semester. And so again, if for some reason there is that additional program fee that is outside of that $3,000 that we pay, that would be the responsibility of the individual. But yeah, with how much tuition is and then $3,000 for that program, if DVR is able to cover that, I have seen families that were like, okay, well then we can make that program fee work. So so our hope is that we can financially support where we're needed. All right. Some other commonly used services. So when we talk about those inclusive higher ed programs, that's just the first stepping stone for that individual. So we'll use that same individual that went through the program to become a dietitian. So let's say they finished their inclusive higher ed program and they weren't employed. And so they needed to continue working with DVR to find a job as a dietitian. So once they finish that inclusive higher ed program, they're then going to get connected with a vendor or a DVR approved vendor that can provide them some services to help them gain employment. If they are individuals who need long-term services, so our supported employment individuals, that's where we're usually going to get them connected with a PASA so that they can receive those services long-term. But if there's someone that doesn't require long-term services, we have lots of DVR vendors, whether they're PASAs or non-PASAs, that can provide different employment services. And that individual will be provided with that informed choice of getting to choose who they get to work with. And so we may set them up with different meet and greets with different vendors so they can decide who it is that they want to work with. But what that provider is going to do is they're going to provide different services that they're going to need in order to be successful in their job. So the first may be job prep and development. So that's really just preparing for and obtaining employment. So actually looking for and getting that job. Then once they have that job, that same provider can be providing job coaching. And so they can be working with that individual to help them to master the duties that they're going to have to perform at that job. Training, that's where the inclusive higher ed program comes into play. So if the job goal that they choose does require some additional training, DVR can support that if appropriate. And then assistive technology. So any type of technology that they may need to help remove that barrier to employment. All right. And then ultimately what we're trying to do is reach case closure. So case closure is when someone has been successfully employed in the job for a certain amount of time. If they are telling us that this is where they want to be, they don't want to work anywhere, they have those long-term services in place if they need them, and they no longer need our services, that's where we're able to successfully close their case employed. So in fiscal year 2023, we did have 1,875 successful closures. These individuals were closed in an average wage of $18.73 an hour. Annually, that is over $37,000 a year. So when we are placing people into jobs, when we are helping people get those jobs, it's all based around what they want to do. I've had individuals come through and say, well, what type of jobs can you get me in? It's really all based on what they want to do. Or some people say, well, what type of jobs do you have to give me? And I'm like, I don't have a drawer of jobs to just hand to you. I want to work together. I want to identify what you want to do and then hopefully try and find the path to employment for what you want to do. So again, one thing when serving the IDD population is staying away from the 4 F's. Food, filth, flowers, and factories. So staying away from just sticking them in food service, keeping them away from just sticking them in janitorial jobs. Flowers are those landscaping crews. We don't just want to stick them on landscaping crews. And then factories, just having them do piecework. That's not what we do at DVR. We try and stay away from those 4 F's. We want to get them into jobs that they actually want to do and be in. All right, so that is everything that I have for you all. So here is my contact information. Of course, Shana included it earlier in the presentation, but please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or need any additional information about DVR. But yeah, I'm willing to stay on if anyone has any questions at the same time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Darby. I will go ahead and conclude our recording just so if our attendee wants to ask some questions, it can be kind of off the record in that way. So thank you so much for your time and all of your expertise on that. Appreciate it.